we can potentially have browse coming from the trees and the shrubs, so we get a diverse diet for the livestock, and we can also get timber from all of these as well. So I'm going to be looking at some of the management for these objectives, including management for timber. So to start off, when you're planting the trees, and I'm not looking at a choice of species or anything like that in this presentation, because that's very site specific. But once you've chosen which species are suitable for both your objectives and for the site, you then need to be planting those trees. And once you've planted the trees, you want to ensure that those trees remain. So you need to protect them from rabbits and other vermin, but also in agroforestry, you need to protect them from livestock. We also then need to make sure that those trees survive and are able to thrive and grow. So we need to manage vegetation, and possible options for vegetation control could be mulching, could be manual control, and becoming less and less likely nowadays is herbicides. And after that, once the trees have started growing and they're established and they're up above the weeds or the grass, and we're starting to look at formative shaping, and I'll explain a little bit about what formative shaping is. And then possibly stumping back, either for if you want to grow coppice, or if you're finding that some of the trees aren't growing very well, have a very poor form, or have been damaged, you can stump them back so they re-sprout again, and you can then single later on. So some of the tree protection that you may be looking at in the center at the bottom there, you can see that there's two types of tree protection, individual tree protection. There's the shelter guards, the green ones, those are like Teagasc tubes, for example, and those can protect the trees from things like rabbits and hares. And then you can see on the right and the left-hand side of that tree line going down the center are those darker guards, and those are spiral guards. And those spiral guards are there to help protect the trees from the elements, but also in this particular case as well, so that those shrubs are visible, so that when you go in and do manual weed control with strimmers, that you can see those trees and those plants and the shrubs don't get damaged accidentally whilst you're carrying out vegetation control. So you can see there in the bottom picture in the center and the top picture in the center that those tree guards, both the Teagasc tubes and the spiral guards, have been used for tree protection. But you can also see that there's been fencing used as well, and I'll go on to that in a second. On the left-hand side of the slide there, you can see there's a sycamore tree, and that sycamore tree is being individually protected by a cactus guard. And on the right-hand side, we can see a tree there that's being protected by a 1.5 meter Teagasc tube, which could be used to protect from deer, as could the cactus guard, I would assume, but also those are being used specifically to protect from livestock. The Teagasc tube on the right could be used mainly for protection from sheep, but also from calves and young cattle. And the cactus guards would be more suitable for protection from cattle. And this image on the left-hand side, the two images on the left, you've got a cactus guard that's been formed there. It's in the center there. It's protecting a tree, and the cactus guard has been held by three rebars. But on the left-hand side is the former that's used to form the cactus guard. So the cactus guard comes in sheets, and the sheets are then put through this former, and you just kind of bend them over and then tie them with time wire. So those are the cactus guards, and they're very good. They're very effective, but they are expensive, and you have to be careful when you use them, because those cactus guards, as you can probably see if you look carefully, you can see spikes on those, hence the name from the cactus guards. And you really do need to be wearing gloves, and decent gloves when you're working with these cactus guards. An alternative in the center there, we can see that there's the Teagasc tubes with the stake, but there's also what looks like cactus guards, but when you actually look closer, you'll see there's no spikes. And those are foxwire guards that have been made. They've been cut from a roll of foxwire. They're cut to a 1 meter length and then rolled so that you've got a diameter of just over 30 centimeters. The top there, two stakes to put either side of the tree, and the guard goes over the top. And those are being tested in Athenry, Teagasc Athenry, to protect those trees from sheep. And those trees have been planted, as you can see, in a multi-species sward. And on the right-hand side is a couple of illustrations of other potential individual tree protection. And then we can also look at protecting trees as groups. So in the top center there, you can see an alley that's been protected, and that is protected with double wire and double strand electric fencing. This is from about 20 years ago, and that was in Johnstown Castle in Teagasc. And that was quite an effective and quite cost-effective form of protection as well. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the alley again with the protection, with the fencing either side. This is in Athenry to protect those trees, that tree rows within the alley design, to protect those trees from sheep. And the bottom right is tree protection in groups. So you can see the group there. There's a group of trees in the center with the Teagasc tubes, and then there's a surrounding shrubs that are in the dark spiral guards. And then that group is protected with sheep fencing. So we've got various forms of tree protection. And we want to protect those trees because those trees can become very valuable. Here's an illustration coming from a French book, which was later translated into English. And this book is looking at growing French oak. And the illustration here, if you look on the illustration on this bar on the left-hand side here, this is looking at the percentage of the volume coming from that tree from the different heights. So the first bar, the 35%, is the volume that comes from the first 6 meters of stem. This 30% in the blue is coming from 6 meters to 12 meters of stem. And then 35% of the volume comes from the crown, from above the 12 meters. So we're getting almost the same amount of volume coming from 6 meters, 12 meters, and then the rest of the crown. But when we look at the monetary value of those volumes, it's a completely different story. 85% of the monetary value of an oak tree in France comes from that first 6 meters, and then 11% from the next 6 meters and 4% from the top volume, from the crown. So this illustrates why it can be important to be looking at how you can maximize the volume and maximize the amount of monetary value you can get from your trees. And you could do this in forestry, but we can certainly do this in agroforestry systems as well. So if we're getting the most monetary value from the bottom 6 meters of the stem, we need to be looking after that bottom 6 meters of the stem. On the left-hand side there, you can see there's a fork which is only about half a meter above the ground. And if that fork wasn't pruned, as it hasn't been pruned, that fork will stay there at half a meter and will not go, as a lot of people seem to assume, will not grow up the tree. It stays at half a meter. That illustrates the image on the right-hand side is a tree that if it 80 years ago or 100 years ago had been formatively shaped or pruned, you'd have had a nice straight stem there. And instead we've got a fork that's got much reduced volume and much reduced monetary value compared to if it had been looked after in its first few years. So formative shaping is a very important and a very easy exercise to carry out. You can do it yourself within the first 2 to 4 years and onwards. You can carry on doing it. And in this, you remove the large branches and you remove the forks and you remove the codominance of only a selection of trees. So this illustration here, you can see we've got grouping 1, 2, 3, and 4. Group 1 are trees that don't need any formatively shaping. They're the ideal trees. Group 2 are ones that, in this case, we've got 2 codominants, those 2 branches at the top that are one either side of the central stem. So those 2 would be removed in a formatively shaping exercise. The group 3 needs a bit more work perhaps to it, and you can see there's a disproportionately large branch, a very large branch there coming off to the left. So we would take that off. And group 4 are ones that really there's no point in formatively shaping. Now, if you've got a case where you've got a lot of in group 1 and a lot in group 2, you may not need to do any formative shaping of group 3 or group 4. But if you've got limited numbers in groups 1 and 2, you may decide to do more formative shaping of the group 3 quality ones. And if you're really stuck, you may decide to do some stumping back of group 4. So when you're formatively shaping, it's important to do it carefully and to be precise with it. So in this illustration on the left here, you can see there's the bark branch ridge, which is this part here. The branch is coming out, and we've got the branch collar here. This branch collar is where the bark continues growing on the tree. So if you damage that branch collar, it will reduce it'll increase the amount of time that it takes for the tree to heal that wound, and therefore increase the amount of time that it could be susceptible for fungal infection. So when we do formative shaping and pruning, we always do it just outside of the branch collar, and then that will allow the tree to heal quicker. So this is an example here where formative shaping has been carried out, and you can see here this is the new leader that has been released from these two co-dominants that were growing either side of it. And this is an illustration, again, just outside of the collar there, and the pruning has been carried out, and then the tree will heal over that. So if it's done properly, you'll find that the tree heals, and you get almost a circle of concentric circles coming over where the branch wound is. And this formative shaping and pruning can be carried out, particularly formative shaping, can be carried out using secateurs and using loppers. So there's no rocket science involved here. It's very easy to do, and it's very satisfying to do as well. So the best times to do this, depending on species, will tend to be either in the winter or in the summer. So for oak, best time would be in December. Second best time is in kind of June, July time. But for ash, beech, sycamore, and cherry, the best time is in the summer, between kind of June and August. And the second best time would be in midwinter. Now for cherry is very important. Cherry is only ever done in the summer. Now in agroforestry, we may not also be pruning and formatively shaping. For timber, we may be formatively shaping and pruning so that we're increasing the benefits of yields from nuts and from fruit. So for apples, the best time to shape and prune is in kind of November to February. And for coconuts, for hazelnuts, winter is the best time. Around about the time for pollen release is about the best time for shaping and pruning. Now, this is an example. Unfortunately, I haven't got any examples of stumping back as such, but I have an example here. This was a site of sycamore. This was about 15 or 18 years old, and the quality of the sycamore wasn't great. And with the owner's permission, I cut a lot of the sycamore down, stumped them back. The original idea was that it was going to be replanted with an alternative species, and those standing sycamore that are left there would be there for shelter. But it was too late in the year to be planting, and when I went back in the summer to just keep an eye on it, there's a lot of coppice regrowth coming up, and the silviculturist in me wouldn't allow me to plant an alternative species, but to manage that coppice instead. So you can see the image in the center there. You can see that coppice regrowth coming up. That is about 4 years after the coppicing was carried out. And again, on the right-hand side, in the summertime, you can see the coppice growing up there. That was then later singled, so that's where in the center there in 2020, 2021 in the winter, there were selected stems. Stems were selected. The best one from each of those coppice stools from those stumps was selected, and the remainder were cut away. So that you're now left with one single stem per stump, and you can see how straight those stems are. So give that another 40 or 50 years, and we'll have some good quality sawlog coming from that stand that previously would have been very difficult to have got. So looking at some subsequent management. So after we've done the formative shaping, we're then looking at other management for example, pruning. So we might be pruning for timber, but we could also be pruning again for fruit and nuts. And if you're pruning for fruit and nuts, you've got a different objective and different pruning techniques are required. So if you're pruning for timber, you're looking for a nice straight stem, 6 meters of clear stem. And after that 6 meters, if you want to continue pruning, you can do, but that 6 meters is where you're going to get 85% of the value, monetary value of that timber. If you're pruning for fruit and nuts, you may be looking more at, rather than a good straight stem, you want a spreading crown. You want air and you want light to get into that crown so that the fruit and the nuts, the yield is better. So that example there in the center is where it's been pruned over the years, the crown's been pruned over the years to spread out, to allow that light and to allow that air into the crown to benefit the fruit. And that example on the right-hand side is more where the stems have been pruned so they're narrow and growing upwards. So you're getting air and light across this dimension rather than in 3 dimensions as in the center there, the center illustration. Now, in agroforestry, we may also be pruning to provide access for machinery, to allow the machineries and tractors to be able to go through without branches hitting off the machinery. We can also be looking at root pruning, particularly in silver arable systems where we've got crops growing underneath the trees, and I'll show an example of that in a few minutes. I've already mentioned coppicing, but we'll have a look at coppicing and pollarding as well. You may be looking at doing some pollarding or coppicing as a management objective. And we also then need to be looking at management of the protection of the trees. In some examples, if you've got Teagasc tubes, for example, those Teagasc tubes, eventually when the trees have got big enough, the tubes will split, and you may need to look at putting an alternative kind of tree protection around those trees. Either something like the fox wire guards or something like a plastic net lawn around the trees to protect the trees from being nibbled at by particularly sheep. And finally, subsequent management can include thinning, and I'll briefly go through a bit of thinning as well with you. So this is an illustration from a book from Brown and Nisbet from 1894. So we're looking at 130 years ago, where they've shown, Brown and Nisbet have shown an illustration of the impact of pruning and what pruning does. So that illustration on the left-hand side, you can see where this branch has been pruned and the tree has grown over that, and it's doing well. And this side here, you can see where a branch was not pruned and the branch has died and has died back. And this is now a dead knot and reduces the value and the quality of the timber. And this is a real example. This is in poplar from about 15 years ago from Teagasc and Concealy. And I had a few poplar trees that were cut down and I split them. And I knew that some of them had been pruned and some hadn't. And you can see here, this one here hadn't been pruned, and you can see those branches similar to that illustration from Brown and Nisbet, where the branches have continued growing and then they've died and have died back within the tree. And this example here, you can see here where a branch has been pruned and the tree has grown over that, and you've now got a much larger area of clear stem over this side. And this is an illustration from I think it was an Italian artist who took a tree and he kind of carved back individual growth rings back and back and back through this large stem until you get this. And you can see how this almost looks like a young tree. And in fact, it is a young tree. This timber would have been put down when the tree was very young. And you can see the branches coming out to the exterior of the very old tree. Now, if these branches had been pruned when the tree was 20 years old, those branches would not have come out into the timber out here 60 or 80 years later, and you would have had good quality, high quality timber coming from this tree. Well, it's a good illustration of what happens on the inside and how we can impact the quality of a tree very early on and have lasting impact. So when we're doing pruning, rather than formative shaping, so pruning of larger branches, the best practice is again looking at the branch collar and keeping just outside of that branch collar we put in a first cut, and this first cut is an undercut. So the idea of this first cut, the undercut, is that when you do this second cut, if the branch breaks before you've got all the way through and the bark starts ripping, it'll only rip up to where this first cut went in. It's not going to continue ripping and continue going down the stem. So this first cut can be very important. So you do the first cut, do the second cut to take most of the weight off, and then this third cut is your final cut. And again, it's just outside that branch collar. So this is the best practice. However, the best practice is not always feasible. When you're doing high pruning at 5 and 6 meters, getting this first cut in can be extremely difficult. So as a second best practice, the second best practice would be to put in a cut, this second cut, maybe 1.5 or 2 foot away from where that final cut is going to be, and cut through. And if that bark does rip, it doesn't tend to rip more than about 1/2 foot to a foot, in which case you've then got this third cut, which in this case will be your second cut in actuality, will then finish off that pruning. And we're doing this pruning for various reasons. It could be for timber, but it could also be for fodder, for providing some browse for livestock. It could be for providing access, both for walking through, but also for machinery. And it could also be for managing the light that's coming down through the canopy to the understory. So if we're doing high pruning, these are some of the tools that may be used. So we've got a telescopic saw here, and we've got telescopic loppers. Health and safety, of course. If you've got things that are dropping down from a height, you should be wearing a helmet and preferably a visor as well, to protect the eyes. And when this high pruning is carried out, we may be doing it for timber quality, as in this case here from Kilgore. It's being done for timber quality. It's being done to manage the light so that the pasture continues to grow well. And also you can see here the sheep are enjoying the prunings coming from these ash trees. This is an example just from yesterday. I was out doing field work on a site. Now, it wasn't an agroforestry site, but this is a site where there's oak trees grown in conjunction with Scots pine. The Scots pine are providing shelter and to the oak trees. And the Scots pine are now at the stage where they're interfering with the oak trees. So to minimize that interference, high pruning is being carried out. So remove some of these branches to provide this extra light so that the oak trees can continue. And that same principle, it can be carried out in agroforestry, but rather than oak trees growing there, you could have crops or pasture growing under here. So you prune the trees that are in the tree lines to provide that extra light. And whilst doing that and whilst providing that extra light, we're also providing good quality timber and the potential for that good quality timber. And this is something that doesn't really matter what objective you have other than possibly fruit and nut. You can get an advantage of pruning and formatively shaping and managing the trees to produce timber as well as everything else that can benefit. So we've got here on the top left, this is in Kilgore where the trees have been pruned, and you get that dappled shade, and the more pruning you do, the more light would come down onto that pasture. The top center, this is where there's epicormics, so you've got side shoots coming out, and those could be nipped off with secateurs, again, to maximize the potential for timber quality. Top right, again, is in Kilgore. These are cherry trees that have been pruned, and you've got the cattle there underneath. And the cherry trees are very high quality. If they continue to be managed correctly, you could get quality veneer timber coming from those. And then the bottom left, we've got, again, can be pruned to manage the understory, to manage the light for the pasture. And the bottom right, this is in the Teagasc system. This is in Spain, where the pruning has been carried out both for the pasture, but mainly for the nut production, for the acorn production. And those acorns will then be used to feed the livestock in the autumn. Now, top left, we're looking here at some coppice. The coppice is being managed so that it's providing shelter to the horticultural crops that are in these alleys in the centre. And it's managed, I think it was something like a 2 or 3 year rotation, so that these ones here would be cut down, and then a couple of years later, these ones on the right-hand side would be cut down. And they grow back again, obviously. And that coppice, if I remember rightly, was being used for wood energy, for chipping. And the bottom left image, again, this is a coppice stool. This is some of that sycamore I was showing you earlier. And you can see where the coppice shoots have come up, and it's now been singled. And this is one stem that's been singled. It's the best quality stem of this particular stool. And then the two images on the right are of pollards, which is just like coppice, but at a height. And the idea of the height is so that animals can't get to the shoots. Now, this is an illustration coming from the Irish Agroforestry Forum. It's an illustration done by Clive Bright. And this is to illustrate root pruning in silviable systems. So in these systems, you've got your trees and you've got the crops growing, and the tree roots, ideally we want the tree roots to come down and then underneath the crop roots, so they're not competing with the crop roots, but they are acting as a safety net, so that any nutrients that go through and aren't captured by the crop can be captured by the tree roots. But like that, we don't want the tree roots to compete with the crop roots. So a way to encourage the tree roots to go deeper is either by ploughing where those red lines are, or by doing deep ripping. They will then help to force those roots downwards, and then they can go outwards underneath the crop roots. And then finally, I mentioned thinning, and this is an example, a conceptual example of thinning in an agroforestry line. This is an agroforestry line that's being demonstrated in Teagasc in Athenry, where the blue are birch trees, the green are oak trees, and the red are cherry trees. And they're planted at 2 meter spacing. And these orange lines are shrub species that are there to provide silvicultural tool to encourage the trees to grow upwards, but also to provide some browse and some shelter for the sheep that are going to be grazing either side of these tree rows. So when these trees are growing, they're growing fine, and then after a while they start competing with each other. And because birch is a quicker growing tree species than cherry or oak, the birch will be the first ones to come out. So maybe be around about year 8 to 12, depending on the site. Those birch trees will likely be thinned out, which will then leave what we've got here, where we've got the oak and the cherry, again with the shrubs still either side. And after a number of years, again, the cherry is quicker growing than the oak, and eventually the cherry will probably be taken out, leaving the oak behind. And at this stage, we'll consider maybe underplanting with another species, so that we've got another species starting to come up underneath. So we'll have, again, a multi-storied system here. And then later on, the oak will be thinned out. So eventually we've got widely spaced oak. And finally, those oak will be felled, and we'll have underplanted species already in here. So we've got a continuous cover forestry type system. So there'll never be a time where there are no trees on the site. So that's how the thinning would be carried out. And the thinning would be carried out really to reduce competition between the trees, but also between the trees and the crop or the grass that's growing either side. And this will help maintain the growth of the trees and the vigor of the trees, but also the growth and the vigor of the crop or the grass that's growing either side of the trees. And then finally, all this management is being carried out for the various different objectives, but also for various different products. So I've mentioned the pruning and the formative shaping for fruits and nuts. We may also take out of the thinnings. So we can see here there's mushrooms being grown, and these are being grown on thinnings of sycamore, and I think these ones were of ash. So we may be growing different products like those. From coppice, we could get basketry and wickerwork. We can also then get wood chip and firewood from thinnings, and then also, obviously, as a later product, we could be getting timber. And if we've managed those trees fastidiously, we could get good quality timber. So that's my final slide. I'd be happy to take questions at the end. I'd like to acknowledge Derek Gibson and Rory Newell, who are the Teagasc forestry technicians that help me look after the agroforestry sites that I work on, as well as the Teagasc farm staff as well. And just a quick note that we are going to be setting up a few living labs in agroforestry next year in Teagasc as part of the eLab project. And if anybody would be interested in getting involved, to contact either myself or Zoe, who's working on the project as well. And our contact details are there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian, for a very comprehensive presentation on all things trees management.
The little nuggets that help and that people remember, and that's something I love about a good presentation. So hopefully I won't disappoint. What would you say? I'll just give you a brief synopsis about what we do. So we're based here in Navan in Meath. We operate from what originally was 50-acre farm. My father purchased additional land throughout his life. In the later years, he got Parkinson's and he diverted into forestry, which at the time was a quite unknown thing in Meath and in general with Irish agriculture. So he planted approximately 30 acres and we added another 20. So we've approximately 50 acres of forestry. We're looking at doing some further agroforestry, but unfortunately Storm Owen this year put our priorities on other aspects of forestry. So we're dealing with that. We're based in Navan. We started as I'm a wood turner by trade. I used to do wood turning for furniture factories here in Navan. Navan originally was the centre of furniture in Ireland. And at that time, when it started, it used all Irish grown timber, mostly from large estates. And the furniture industry sort of petered out, and with it all the small scale sawmills. So we're based here in Navan. Originally we started doing firewood. We ended up we're doing about 2,500 cubic meters of firewood annually. There's full-time people here, and we take on part-time people in the summer. You can see one of our men there, Andreas, quite happy. That is what I'd call a log that we rescued. It was a large oak tree that came down in an estate, and we liberated it, and I bought it off the guy. It took a crane lorry to get it home. That log was 7.5 tons lifting onto the truck. We actually had to convert it down to a square using a chainsaw mill. It's a fantastic piece of oak. That's our sawmill that we use to sawmill down the timber. If we want to go on to the next one there, Maureen. So we started out obviously processing forestry thinnings. We're members of a forest owner group, the North East Forestry Group. We're also certified with firewood producers with the WFQA. I think the firewood section has been a great source of, what would you say, of income for forest owners, because originally when the firewood sector was in its embryonic stage, the price of pulp was very, very low to forest owners, and firewood and energy has increased the value that forest owners are getting for their timber. There's a stack of pulpwood in our yard getting ready for processing. We can talk about that after. If we want to go on to the next one there, Maureen. So what we looked at doing here, because I used to get timber milled with sawmills around Navan years ago when I was doing the wood turning, they all petered out because the supply of timber wasn't there, and imported timber with the higher quality just petered out the sawmilling industry. So we were coming across, what would you say, timber that I would consider too good for firewood. And I was looking at this saying, this really, we shouldn't doing this. So what we looked at doing was, and we purchased a small, what I would call entry-level sawmill from Logasol. to see was there a financial proposition, and we started converting some of the small value pulp or the larger type pulpwood that was straight, and we converted it into a higher value sawlog. There's a load of thinnings that we're bringing back from where we store it at our forest road for drying, and you can already see some of the timber there would make reasonable sawlog. Some of that would be classed as pallet wood, I'd say, if you really were looking at it in a grading style. If we go on to the next one there, Maureen. So there's basically some of the stuff we do. We do sawmilling. We're bespoke sawmillers in that we don't sawmill what the large scale sawmills produce. They sawmill 6x2, 4x2, mostly Sitka spruce. We do bespoke sawmilling for different projects, for different people, using different things and requiring different types of timber. So there's Douglas fir, and their display trusses that we're manufacturing there for a new build. The one on the right hand side was for a large kitchen. The one on the left hand side, if you notice the notches out of it, that was for a porch that the guy, we did the interior trusses, and then when he had the house built, he decided that he wanted a truss for the outside. So you can actually see the notches on it going along where the slating lats slid into that. You can see the dowels down at the bottom. They're oak dowels that we turn for the mortise and tenons that we make the display trusses out of. If you look at that timber there is 150 by maybe 200 mil cross section. So it's actually not that huge a timber. And because of the fact that they're not load bearing trusses, the timber quality isn't massively important. It's more the aesthetics and the look that is designed for. So I actually did a course in Scotland with a post and beam tutor, James Thompson, who's actually going to be doing a post and beam course here with our owner group, the Northeast Forestry Group, next spring. And it's something that he was quite passionate about, was the fact that it doesn't have to be oak to be a post and beam. And that's the reason I actually went to him. There's plenty of post and beam people training. Not that many will do with a softwood, even though what I would consider Douglas fir, it'll be a hard softwood, if you know what I mean. So if we go on to the next one there, Maureen. So there's an example now of Irish grown timber that we made into a carport. So the post and beam, so the posts there are 150 by 150 section. So you'd possibly get that out of a 200 or less circular tree. And that's what I'm saying. So we're looking at trying to see, can we, and beam timber, if I loved Dr. Ian's presentation there about the value of timber, that in the first 6 meters, there's 80% of the value of the timber. And that would be for quality sawlog. But if we look beyond that, post and beam timber would be a lower grade timber. And that's where I think at the start of where our hardwoods and non-mass grown softwoods could be used for and could be utilized for. If you look at the front of that structure there, you have T and G. So that's tongue and groove boards. They're 100 mil by 25 mil. We ran them out of the round timber that we were converting down to the square for them beams. So that whole structure was made out of timber that was grown in Ireland, not 70 mile away from where the structure is actually done, finished there. If we just go to the next one there, Maureen. So here's a particularly interesting one. There was a lady in a local forest owner in our group, and she contacted us about getting a contractor to thin her ash. And we fixed her up with introduced her to a contractor, and he did the work on her ash. While he was there, he was going to thin some larch. And she then decided that she wanted us to make a copy of the Japanese bridge that's down in the Japanese gardens out of larch that came from her forest. So we actually he picked the quality trees. We brought it home. We milled it, and then she had already generated. If you see the red there, that curve, that was a steel structure that she had already got made. So we clad. If you look on the right there, we clad the steel structure with the deck lats, and we cut out the posts out of the larch that she provided. On the left hand side, you can see us putting we turn the top newels, I call them newels, I suppose, from local timber and put them into that. The lady actually came over and she turned some of the top knobs there on the top herself. It was lovely to see something that was grown in her own forest coming back as a finished article. So that's another project using local timber. If we go on there, Maureen, the next one.
I'm trying, John.
Yeah, no worries.
Hmm.
We're just
Is that it?
yeah, that's it there. So while we purchased a machine, a planer that planes, it's called a four-sided molder. It planes all four sides at the one time, and in that there came a selection of cutters, and one of the cutters generates a profile, a semicircular profile. If you look down on the left-hand side, you can actually see the bundle of timber there. There's a semicircular profile. So one of the profiles there, the guy there that you saw sitting on the piece of timber at the front, Andreas, and he wasn't a qualified joiner or carpenter. He just came as an engineer with us, from an engineering background, and he decided he'd like to make a sauna during lockdown and COVID, and he made it in the workshop, and he made it out of pulpwood, which was fun, that came in as firewood, which was absolutely fantastic. So then we decided that we'd make a couple ourselves here. So these have been ran out, and if you look at that, they're what I'd call 4x2s, as we all would understand. They're 100x50s. Then again, there again, we have use for our small scale minor conifers. If you also look at the sauna, you can see all the little lats there where people sit and step on. That was made out of what I would call inch boards, which are 25 mil, and they came when we were converting it down. So all of that material there came from local forests. And if you look at the 3 feet on the bottom, we made them out of Douglas fir. And the reason we made them out of Douglas fir was, number one, the sizes we had suited. Plus, it was we consider a little bit more durable. And at the very bottom of it, we put 3 little horizontal, if you see them, little flat, what I'd call feet. And therefore, if the timber eventually decays, they can be sacrificed and new ones put in. We still make some of them. If we go on to the next one there, Maureen. There's another interesting one. So a guy from Trim who does canoes from Trim to halfway down to Navan, he does adventure activities on the Boyne. He has a set of races put in on the river. So he has a cabin and he has changing facilities there, and he wanted to do an entrance just to show, to sort of as a signature for his premises. And he came over and originally looking to put up a set of goalposts like an American ranch, and then we got talking to him, and then he ended up putting up the structure in the center that you see there. Now he has a particularly good carpenter on the job. I call him the hippie chippy because he thinks beyond outside the box. So we needed all sorts of different pieces of timber for the project. Because I'm in the Northeast Forestry Group, we were able to source all types of timber there. If you look at that one on the right, there where you have all the circular logs buried in I think it was a resin. They were Douglas fir. They came from a local person. We used some oak thinnings to make the fence there on the left-hand side. Do you know what you need is somebody that thinks outside the box in using all of this timber came from the beauty of it was them poles we delivered over to him. He made the structures. He just took the bark off them, cleaned them up, and made the structure. The boards on the side are large boards that we milled locally. Do you know? And that was it's a lovely place because of it. And actually, he's a bit like a gift that stays on given, because every year he rings me and says, John, I'm thinking of doing something else. And he has added on further from that. And now he has a little enclosed area, and he has put a stove in. So now he's actually buying firewood off us every year. So he's an ongoing, hopefully he'll be staying ongoing. But we had a couple of events and launches at that, because it was nice to see local timber being used. If we go on to the next one there, Maureen. So within our group, the Northeast Forestry Group, we're members of the Irish Forest Owners, which is it's an umbrella group for all the forest owner groups in Ireland. Originally, there was a group, the Limerick Tipperary group, had a project called the Small Diameter Hardwoods Project. I participated in that. We went to the UK. We did a very, very interesting course there called the Woodland to Workshop program. So we came home and we looked at the Northeast Forestry Group and we thought maybe we should do something like that. So we kindly got some funding from the Department of Agriculture. It was a hugely successful project. We ended up doing a stand at the Techno Teachers down in Athlone. There's the Techno Teachers, there's our stand. Within the project, we were given a bursary to give schools Irish grown timber, Irish sawn timber for particular projects that they would do. So there were some of the items that they produced. Now there was far nicer pieces of furniture which were produced, but this is the interesting thing that the woodwork teacher said. All the offcuts were then used to generate all these other items. If you look, there's a chessboard there on the left-hand side. There's toys there on the right. There's a rest for a phone there on the right. And if you look on the background, there's a series of axes there, and that's not from an axe murderer. That's from a local guy who refurbishes antique axes. And he came into our yard looking for ash that hadn't been kiln dried because of it seems to be able to take shock more if it's not kiln dried. So he actually picked all of that ash out from planks that we had planked locally as well. So that was a huge success. That one now really, really generated a lot of interest. I think that we have a huge market for Irish grown timber in local secondary schools, because there's loads of small scale sawmillers within Ireland. There's one particular sawmills provider who I brought the small scale sawmill off originally. He told me he sold 170 sawmills to forest owners throughout Ireland. So we at the moment are starting with some Department of Agriculture. We are actually starting a guild of these small scale sawmillers, and our aim is to supply local schools, local craft users with this timber. If we go on to the next one there, Maureen. So here's an example, and I just found it interesting. After I was talking to Maureen the other day, and we had a long chat, as we do have, about timber, agroforestry, etc. And I was down in my own forest, and we have an oak plantation that we thinned this year. We're managing it under continuous cover. I had guys in taking out our windblow with our Sitka. So we had our trees marked, and I got the guys that were in with the chainsaws to do the thinning. So there's a log that was marked. You can see the red marker on it for out. It was cut at 3 meters length, and I was looking at it at the side of the walk, at the path, and I was coming up the other day, and I went back down and I measured that, and that was a 22-year-old log. That's when it was planted, 28 centimeters in diameter. So I then could convert that realistically into an 18, what I would say 180 by 180 mil beam. And if we really wanted to use it as beam oak to not worry about the sapwood, it would be quite easily converted into a 150 by 150 beam. And that's the basis for most post and beam construction. So what I'd be saying is, let's not think that that because we've oak, we won't get something out of it for 80 years, 100 years. We will be getting things out of it. And I think ideally agroforestry, we can get things out of it. And it doesn't all, I know there is a place, and we don't grow hardwoods. I think we have to get around the fact that we don't grow hardwoods for firewood. We grow it for sawlog. Firewood is only a waste product along the way to generating sawlog and to generate an income for forest owners. But if you look at that particular log there, it could quite easily go into a sawmill or into a firewood processor and would be processed into firewood. But if you think of what we could make out of that, we can bring it back to a beam. We can then capture the carbon in that. And that beam then can be used for something else. So this week, I'll just give you an example of who the people I had in. So I have a guy in today looking for a 220 or a 20 centimeter by 20 centimeter oak for a fireplace. Not concerned about quality. He wants a rustic look. We have another guy who came in. He's doing up an old cottage with a mill on it. He wants larch and Douglas for door frames, and he's going to make a Z pattern old type door. So we'll have enough timber for that for him. So then this evening, I had a guy rang me. He's doing up a cottage, and he wants rustic type beams to give a cottage feel to the old building he's doing up. All of that timber could be got out of that small diameter timber. All of it. And it wouldn't have to be oak, but I'm just saying that's a prime example of what we can use it for. If we like to go to the next one there, Maureen. There's our little sawmill. I bought the sawmill. We bought the sawmill from Poland without seeing it during COVID. We then decided to put up a shed. We hadn't enough time, or we would have made our own post and beam shed, but we put it up a steel shed, but we clad it in pulpwood. So that's all clad in Sitka spruce with a sawn finish with 2 coats of stain. And the amount of people who've come into the yard and seen that building and thought, wow, that's a lovely structure, because to see the timber. And this is where I think the future of hardwoods in Ireland is going to be. I think there's a small scale production. We're not at the level where we're going to be able to supply hardwood to quality people, so like furniture or joinery in the short term. But between the firewood and furniture and joinery, there is a huge amount of people who will use timber that we can saw and produce locally. And this is where I think that agroforestry and forestry will reap the benefits of perhaps minding and shaping our timber. Because people ring me and say, we also do some bespoke sawmilling for people. So people who have trees, and they ring me up and they ask me, would you cut up a tree for me? And I say yes. And the first question I ask them is, how long of a straight stem have you got on that? And the rule for me, Ian, is, because it's my own sawmill and it's handy to saw, I say you need at least 2 meters before it's worthwhile sawing it. But I'd be saying 2.5, 3 meters of straight timber, really with no kinks, bends, twists, or, as you say, forks. Now, you will, out of some timber, you will get some really nice looking timber suitable for slabs, for tables. But really, for somebody to get something usable, that's what we want. And I think that's the metric we need to look at when we're growing timber, is to show forest owners where the timber ends up that we're using, and where the fact that they actually need to shape that timber to get it to that stage. And I think it's all very well saying to say we need to shape timber, shape the trees. But if you look at the diagram that Ian showed us earlier, with very little effort, a forest owner can increase the value of his hardwoods or timber or trees hugely and immensely. So if you can imagine for firewood, I'm just looking at it here, for firewood here, the general run is about 80 euros a cubic meter. Well, that's what I was paying pre-storm. And if you sawed that hardwood timber and dried it and made it saleable, it has a potential value of €2,500 a cubic meter. There's the difference. There's a huge difference there. And for the forest owner, small scale sawmillers, we can all be a part of this and we can all reap the benefits of it, not in the long term, but in the short to medium term. Is there, Maureen, I think nearly I've covered as much as am I on time, over time, or where are we on time?
You're on time, John. Brilliant.
So is there...
Thank you very much. That's
Thanks for
fantastic.
that.
Really good presentation. And my apologies about that lovely video. So
No.
folks, it was nothing, technology did not fail. It was the way I turned off the mic on my computer. So I could hear it, but you couldn't. So my apologies. I will circulate the link to the video afterwards. I know there's some questions in the Q&A, which we'll go to, and then I'll send you an invitation to be on screen if you want to. But if the speakers turn on their cameras again, we'll go to the Q&A as well at the same time. Okay. The first question, I think, is for Ian. Were the costings on the French oak grown in a similar situation to the ones you illustrated, or were they in forests? The first 6 meters seems to be up to the first branch, ?
So that illustration came from a book that is looking at what's called dynamic silviculture. And that type of silviculture is where you grow the trees in a free growth state, so a very wide spacing. And anytime the canopy of a neighboring tree gets close to a tree, you then start thinning. So you have very little competition. And that would be similar to how the trees would probably be grown in agroforestry, because they'd be at wide spacing. So the costings that are there are from, I would argue, would be feasible for agroforestry as well. They're from a forestry system, but a completely different type of forestry system than what we would normally be practicing, particularly in conifers anyway. But it is something that's becoming more looked at in hardwoods nowadays, is kind of the free growth, and like that book is saying to grow oak the 60 centimeters diameter in 100 years. And this is the book is kind of saying that this is achievable. Well, I mean, John, you've shown there your oak that was it 20 years old and was
22,
yeah, and was 26 or 28 centimeters diameter. I mean, that's well over 1 centimeter diameter increment per annum. So if that tree was 100 years old, it'd potentially be over 100 centimeters in diameter. So I think we can definitely grow 60 centimeter oak in less than 60 years, I would imagine, if it's grown as a free growth type system or in agroforestry, where you have very little competition. And therefore the costings that were shown there would be similar to that, I would imagine.
Thanks, Ian. So there's another question here from Jeff Newman. Has much work been done on how different species respond to root pruning in silvo-arable systems? Do some species struggle as they rely more on surface rooting, or do all species adapt well to this management?
That I'm not too familiar with. I do know, I mean, I have seen in North America when I was over there 20 odd years ago, there was poplar that was grown in a silvo-arable system, and root pruning had been carried out, and the trees were probably around about 20 years old, 15 or 20 years old, And the roots that there was a student, Rick Gray, was doing a master's study, and he was digging trenches at 1 meter distances from the tree row into the maize, the soybean, and the wheat, and mapping the root profiles. And he was finding that the poplar roots were down and underneath the crops, but he also found occasionally that poplar does root sucker, and so occasionally he would find that there was a shoot of poplar coming up in through, it could be a good few meters away from the tree line. But that was in a no-till management regime as well. So there was root pruning done just along the tree row, but there was no till carried out within the crop. If there was tillage carried out within the crop, that would have controlled the root sucker coming up. But those trees, and there was walnut, and there was red oak, I think, on that site, and they all seem to be doing something similar, that the tree roots were going down and out. But I'm not familiar with anything other than those ones in North America, in Canada. Those were.
I think generally silvoarable is one where there's a lot of innovation happening, and I know there's a lot of research going on in the Netherlands as regards root pruning, as regards alley widths, all the various, and then selection of trees for that tree crop interaction specifically. Question there, and I'm guessing the answer to that one. Can you root prune on thin soils, e.g. the Leitrim drumlins? That's what the person has asked.
Well, I mean, obviously there's been no research on that. I wouldn't like to categorically say one way or the other, because I don't think there's the research there to back up the answer.
John, it's a question for you. Have you processed alder? And the person says, I think saunas were traditionally made from alder.
Yeah, we have processed some alder, and the only thing about alder, it wouldn't be suitable, and it is probably a use that we're going to have for alder coming on in the future, because of the fact that saunas were traditionally made from western red cedar, and the price of western red cedar is astronomical, which is good for those of us who have planted some western red cedar. But alder has the same thermal properties as western red cedar, but it can only be used internally in saunas. So the outside of the sauna, it wouldn't do well exposed to the weather outside. That's the only thing. But I think for alder, we have in our own forest, I think we have 9 acres of alder that we've thinned twice, and it's coming on in diameter. And I think that's the use I see for it, would be essentially timber for boards, for like small for say 90, 70, 80 millimeter by 25 boards for saunas, for cladding as such.
Can I add something there as well, Maureen?
Yep.
I had a student a few years back doing a master's at Colin Marin, and he was doing a master's project with Letterfack College, and that was on alder and potential uses of small diameter alder. And one of the uses that was looked at was to use it for coving in interiors. And then also he sent some alder out to schools for them to try the alder for woodworking classes. And the feedback he got, similar to what John had mentioned before, was that it was very good, it was very usable, very student friendly, and if they could get their hands on it, they would love to have more of it. And particularly with having this story as well of having locally grown alder being used in local schools and having that connection. But one of the issues that came up was that a lot of the purchasing is done centrally, and a lot of that timber that's being used in the schools comes from North America and elsewhere. And that's something that really we should be trying to change, and getting local timber into local uses.
Yep.
Great. Thanks. Question again for John. Oh, sorry, Jim, go ahead.
Just could I add something? A couple of years ago, we had a group of Europeans came to Loughgall, to the trial site there, and Germans in particular, I remember telling me that there was a huge demand for good alder for kitchens and kitchen units. Apparently, they're very
Yeah,
fashionable, sort of a greyish wood or something like them. And they said they were getting great prices for alder, for
yeah.
well-grown alder, so that there was potential there.
Great. Question for John. How long did it take for the sawmill to cover its purchase cost? Says you,
It
has it
depended.
covered it yet?
Yeah, that's how long is a piece of string. We originally bought a small entry-level sawmill, and at the time I think it was around about €6,000, um, and that was an entry-level sawmill, fairly manual, fairly. What I would be saying to somebody is a sawmill is not the route to riches, and when I started sawmilling, when you get a piece of timber in, you think every tree is going to be gold, and you cut an awful lot of lead before you discover what gold is. So you become very ruthless in what you sawmill. I think it's something that I wouldn't jump into unless you have a definite use for it. Now I know a number of people have bought them because they have the timber in their own forest and they're making fencing posts and they're getting use. They're adding value to their own timber. But I would say that unless you have some experience in timber and doing something with it, I wouldn't jump into it as such. It depends on what you want to do.
Okay, there's a few comments in the chat, people saying thank you for great presentations, which they were. James Ranskin Gardner, there's been a lot of discussion and focus on oak tonight, and rightly so, lovely timber. However, this year we had a reasonable amount of Quercus poisoning of livestock due to acorn consumption. So I know there's been an AFB report was published today, or a notice on it, and there was one in England. What would you advise a farmer wanting to grow oak and silvopasture, but who has concerns over this? Jim, maybe you might answer that. Do you want to answer it?
Well, yes,
Jim
I mean, I
McAdam.
saw that publication by AF coming out this today, and I have a colleague who works in AFB, and he said he would contact the vets and so on for me and produce a report on that because it's not something I've been familiar with. I mean, there are
No.
suggestions that, okay, we know pigs eat acorns and they can be quite a upmarket product from it. But no, I don't have any full detail on that, but it's obviously of concern if you know
Yeah.
if
I
that's
think
given. I've never heard
I
of.
think acorns are officially, yeah, they are poisonous on the kernel database to cattle and horses, but they have to consume a certain amount of them, and they only eat
Mhm.
them. Sheep, cattle, and horses only eat them when they're soft, so when they fall first. And this year, particularly, there's been a lot. It's a mast year where there's a lot of acorns
Yeah.
on the pasture.
Mm.
So sheep, technically, the sheep can't be poisoning them, but of course, if they ingest too much of something that is high in tannins and things like that, it may actually result in mortalities. So there's been a lot of discussion. Farmers themselves have talked about this amongst their membership, and they've talked about rotational grazing, maybe on those years where there is a lot of acorns, that they actually would, in their rotational system, keep livestock out during that time of year. Or maybe we need to do a little bit of innovation, and it would be that they'd be out for the first couple of weeks and then they'd be in once the acorns harden up or whatever. So, but it'd be interesting to
I
see what AFB actually, the Rodrigo. Sorry, John. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes
Did you?
it could be that, if stock haven't a huge amount of grass or stuff like that. We've had that in the past, that we possibly left sheep in areas under trees that for longer than they should have, because of the fact that we thought the heat, and then they went into graze under bushes and they got earth. So sometimes it's sometimes, and I'm not saying it would be, but stock management too, like there's oak trees around the country for hundreds of years. It's not for. I think it could be just down to a little bit of management.
Yeah.
It's the same
It
sort of
is
issue
the thing.
as a
Sorry, did
sycamore with horses. I mean, there have been reports that sycamore can damage horses, and it's not obviously it's happened because people have reported it, but you know, it seems to be dependent on the grazing conditions and the health conditions of the animals, and very often it's sort of older horses that put into paddocks where there are trees and sycamores and stuff, and they've had health problems. So yeah, it's an issue just to keep an eye on, but it's probably not, you know, an overriding factor in the selection of tree species.
It is the case, like as John pointed out there, that ruminants are ruminants for a reason, and grass is best for them, and trees or tree fodder or products from trees shouldn't surpass any more than 20% of their diet at any time, if you know what I mean. So if there is no grass to eat and they consume more than 20% of their diet from trees, then there's going to be a problem. So the balance is important. It also means as well, if you've plenty of grass there, they're not going to damage your trees. Is there any more? Have I missed any questions in the chat there? Eugene, I don't know if you've any questions for John or Ian, or any comments yourself actually on timber coming from agroforestry systems.
No, I'm hugely impressed with John's presentation and with Ian's. They're both extremely positive, and I've always, as anybody who's had to endure listening to me beating the drum for forestry and timber production, and just it's very heartening to see that there's real evidence there to show that quality timber can be produced, and it doesn't have to be 100 years old, as John was pointing out. It can be quite small, and there are loads of potential for the likes of sycamore and cherry and alder as well. I remember there was a research years ago, maybe 40 years ago at this stage, into alder, and said it was highly comparable to imported alder. And it's just what was happening back in the day was that just the volume of quality timber available to companies, manufacturers and craft people, there just wasn't a consistent supply. But I think that's going to change. And as John sort of said, agroforestry is probably ideally suited. And John and Ian was sort of saying that the free growth environment in which the trees are growing, and the less density, so that you can focus your management and your pruning and your thinning on fewer trees. So I think there's huge potential to grow quality timber for small, localized industries.
Could I just follow up on that, Maureen? And yeah, thanks. Both presenters are really excellent. For me, not a forester, just an agronomist, and who tries to sell agroforestry systems. There's a lot of knowledge there. Thanks, John. One question, Ian, or John, and probably could answer this better. The only experience I have really was growing ash in our silvipastoral trials, where we grew ash at wide spacing, 5 meters apart and 10 meters apart, and 5 meters apart, 400 trees per hectare, grew fantastically well, and we had them compared with normal woodland grown at 2 meters apart. So but the trees produced from both were completely different. The ones from the close grown trees were slower growing. They were very dense, so much heavier wood. Whereas the ash grown at the open spacing, where they had plenty of space, you know, their diameter growth was phenomenal, to the point of view that whenever we came to thinning them and we got the hurley makers to come and look at the crop, they just went mad for it. They thought this was a fantastic way to grow ash, and you know, they bought the whole. We sold the thinnings of our first thinnings for about €1,000 a hectare. We got out of that at 12-year-old. So they said that the sticks they produced, they had tremendous spring in them, so they weren't breaking. In other words, there's a lot of give in them compared to normal density ash. Okay, now we're not, you know, planting more ash at the minute, but do you think, so if we're going to get two different sorts of trees from trees grown at wide spacings, as we will in agroforestry, compared to trees grown densely in woodland, will there be a market for both those timbers, do you think, either way, no matter what's produced?
I would say yes, because if you have a wide use for all the timber so in other words, if you just focus on saying I'm growing timber and it's going to be barrel oak, well, then you'd be throwing out a lot of oak along the way. If you're growing ash or if you're growing cherry, like we have milled, and I actually didn't put it up. I should have. We've milled Irish cherry, and we've done a lovely kitchen unit island, and it was a free growing cherry tree. So as far as I'm concerned, unless you're going into something that you're actually going looking at structural density, structural grade timber, and I think in the short term we probably wouldn't be using it like that. So I think definitely, absolutely, if the timber's there, it has the size and it's straight enough and it's minded well enough at the start, there's always a use for it. Do you know? And there's different characters in different. If you look at the dense type timber, it's fairly close. But then the free grown has more of a character in it too sometimes, because there's more variance in it.
Eugene, do you want to come in on that there? Have your hand up. We actually have a question for you straight away afterwards. So yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask John quickly, any advice to a small plantation owner who has some broadleaves that are coming up to, 20, 30 years old and being thinned? Any advice on how to sell it or how to find a buyer?
That's another question, Eugene, that our forest owner group as our members, we always looking at, Eugene. I think you have to identify what you want, what you have first of all. Is there some of it that could be used for sawmill, for posts, for small scale beams? If you could get to a 3 meter length and beyond the straight timber, yes, you could possibly sell that at a certain diameter. What happened?
Buy it? Buy it? Who'd buy it?
Yeah, well, maybe some of the 170 people that bought small scale sawmills would buy it, and that's why we're forming a guild to bring us together, and we are very grateful to the department in the past for getting us. Like, we're on a 4-project journey for developing markets for hardwoods. And along the way, and I'm not blowing up the department, along the way, the department has helped us the whole way. But we're on a 4-project journey, and we're on a culmination of starting a guild of small-scale sawmillers. We're actually having an inaugural meeting where we're going on a scoping meeting on the 28th of November. So hopefully, and we're having a guy coming over to do a post and beam course as a signature event, which will be using small diameter timber for post and beam. So, and as I said earlier, post and beam timber can be used in, from small diameter timber.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Eugene, I'd say this is for you. Is there potential for including a small percentage of softwood in agroforestry systems? Is it silviculturally suitable, and would it be permitted?
Yeah, we certainly have approved quite a number of plantations with Scots pine in it, for example. And again, if it's pruned and shaped similar to a broadleaf tree, the timber it produces can be excellent, and there's adds a bit of variety to the type of timber being produced in a plantation. I suppose it depends on the objectives that the landowner wants, and if they wanted for shelter for cattle, for animal welfare reasons, there's a lot to be said for some conifer trees being planted in groups, perhaps, where animals can shelter with the fact that they retain their foliage in the winter, that they have that kind of outdoor shed type environment for them when the weather's bad. And additionally, if it's very sunny, they'd have that shelter as well, but then obviously with broadleaves, they'll have the leaves available to them in the summer to get out of the sun. But yeah, look, I think if somebody is interested in planting an agroforestry plot, I think put a plan together and contact your local Teagasc advisor or local inspector, bounce it off them, and see where we can go from there.
Great, thanks, Eugene. And there's a comment here, and I think it's from Joe Curran, and it's probably I think everybody will agree with it. And he says, "Is minded well enough at the start, the phrase to be repeated again and again," which it probably is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let me just go back to I think some things have been put in the chat. Ian and John, what is the biggest barrier to successful small-scale timber? Lack of small sawmills, lack of people growing and managing for timber, or lack of support infrastructure to make it work, contractors, timber hauliers, etc.? What's the biggest barrier? Do we know?
Well, to start with, up to this point, I would say that it's the resource, having sufficient resource for there to be markets to develop. Now, if you think that the year where we had the greatest amount of forestation was in 1995, so that's 30 years ago. Now, some of that would have been hardwoods, not all of it, obviously, but a proportion of that was hardwoods. And as the years have gone on, there's been a greater proportion of hardwoods being planted each year. Mm-hmm. So we're now getting to the stage where we're getting first and second thinnings of hardwoods. So we're now getting a greater resource coming on stream. And when there's a resource available, people will find ways to make money from it. And that's where the markets will start to develop. So in the past, I think it's just that there hasn't been that raw resource. There hasn't been the raw product available. Nowadays, like John said, it was 170 sawmills, you said, John?
Yeah.
So it's hard to think that it's the availability of the sawmills is an issue anymore. But that may be the case. I think part of it could be that there's been insufficient past management to give the quality of product that we could have had. That could be an issue. But what about yourself, John?
I definitely think you're right there in that there's been a gap in the management skills of what I'd say hardwood trees, simply because they didn't see a need for them. I think the one thing is the challenge will be to get all them people who have them small scale sawmills to be able to produce quality timber that can be used further on up. Because as I say, firewood is only developed as a market because that was the type of timber that was being produced, the first timber that came out of the hardwoods. Now we're moving on to what we can call, I would say, secondary grade sawmilling type timber. And I think that's where the small scale sawmillers will probably shine, because we'll get use for it. But then what we're hoping to do is upskill all them sawmillers that are there, that as the timber that's produced becomes better quality, that they will get that quality timber and take it and produce something from it that would be of higher value. And once they're getting a higher value sale for it, they will pay higher value money for it, because there will be a series of people there to buy it. So it's chicken and egg situation. But I do think that we are coming to the stage where proper management of hardwoods will be seen as a way of producing money long term, as an investment. The one thing I always say is, if you told the next generation that you were giving them an apartment in Drogheda worth 200,000, they'd be over in Drogheda that night. They have it grown in the house, in the field at the back of the house, and they don't even appreciate it. So, it's people's perception of value that we have to change to as regards forestry. Sorry, that's a rant.
Thanks, John. There's a comment there from Rowan Reid. He's logged in from Australia, so thank you, Rowan. Oak is ring porous, so the faster you grow it, the higher the density. Our free-grown oak from 20-year-old trees had a 12% moisture content, And he talks about traditional oak growers for battleships. The faster diameter growth, the denser the wood. So I suppose it's remains to be seen. It's not as a common draw. There's another question.
Sorry,
sorry,
as a
go ahead.
general comment as well, the faster the grown oak and other species are, the larger the rings are, and the more suitable it is for veneer. But for veneer, you need to have that very good quality. So you need to have it well pruned and well formatively shaped in those early years as well.
Okay. So lots of training and knowledge transfer needed on the management of trees. We're just going to take one last question now, folks, because we're over time, if that's okay. And it's, are there any non-native hardwoods that you would recommend? I'm thinking of the likes of Robinia. So this is the conversation that happens all the time. We have people who only want to plant native trees for various reasons. I think generally the forum's opinion on that is that we're in the middle of climate change and we need to be open-minded about what will grow here in 50 years and what grows here now and things like that. The important thing about trees is that nothing is invasive, nothing impacts on flora and fauna that are here already. But does anybody want to take a question, answer that? Maybe Eugene, do you want to take that? Non-native hardwoods?
We have no problem with non-native species in our scheme FT8, as long as they have provenance certs and they're on the list of approved species. If there are other species that people are interested in planting, they'd want to contact the local inspector, and he will check, or the local forestry Teagasc advisor, and they will check with our forest plant health and quality people in the department to make sure it isn't invasive and will be a problem in the future. But we have no real agenda with non-native species being planted.
Just on that, if you don't mind me just putting in, I really think as farmers and custodians of the land is what we really are. I think we need to consider when we are planting what the timber is going to be used for at the very end. I think that's what we need to focus on, rather than, I think in the past we might have focused on what was best suited for growing and what could grow as quick as we could and get us up and running. But I think at this stage we need to focus on what's the timber going to be used for, and can we grow it with the soil that's suitable. And I think there's plenty of options there with the variance of species that's available at the minute. My own personal opinion is we don't need to go plant an exotic species if we concentrate on the variance we have for the soil suitability and what the end product is going to be for. And I think if we focused on that, what we're going to use the timber for, rather than how quick it grows, you know.
I suppose that's always the way, isn't it, John? Like with agroforestry systems, we're looking at what trees to plant, where to put them, why are we putting them there, and what services they're going to provide to the farm, to ecosystems, things like that. And sometimes with agroforestry and with forestry generally, there's a significant cohort of people that think that trees shouldn't be felled, but particularly specifically for agroforestry systems, timber is part of the conversation, because you heard Ian say that trees have to be managed for the grass to grow, trees have to be managed for the crops to continue to grow. And if we want to have productive agroforestry systems, timber is part of the cycle. So regardless, it's not necessarily ever going to be a clear fell situation, but there'll always be thinnings and replanting happening with agroforestry systems. So I'll bring it to a close if that's okay, folks. I'd like to thank our speakers and panelists this evening. I think it was a very interesting webinar. We rarely talk about timber from agroforestry systems, and it's been wonderful to have a webinar on it. And I think it's amazing how much information is out there, but I'm very grateful to John and Ian for giving such interesting presentations. I will make them available to everybody later. I'll send them out by email. There will be a recording available of the talks, and of course there's lots of information and resources on our website. Just to say as well, DAFM have funded a booklet on producing timber from agroforestry systems, which is about to be drafted and should be available in the spring. And we will be holding two producing timber from agroforestry systems, or producing quality timber from agroforestry systems workshops. One will be in the north of the country and one will be in the south of the country. And dates of those will be circulated probably in January of when they're going to happen. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.